The stars blinked softly in the dark void of space, and the human hospital ship Hope's Light sailed through the quiet cosmos, carrying its precious cargo. It was a peaceful mission, a simple one. The ship was filled with doctors, nurses, and medical supplies, all heading to the distant colonies on the edge of known space. The crew's only job was to provide medical care to those who needed it most. They were an ordinary crew, doing important but humble work. No one could have predicted that this routine journey would turn into a nightmare. Captain Maria Sullivan stood on the bridge, her eyes fixed on the distant stars. She had always been a calm leader, someone who could keep her head in any situation. Today, she was reviewing the medical data for the upcoming supply drop. Everything was going according to plan. The Hope's Light had been cruising peacefully for days without incident. But there was something in the air, a strange feeling that made her uneasy. She couldn't place it, but something felt off. "Captain, we're approaching the Varknith sector," Lieutenant Orin remarked, his voice cutting through the calm atmosphere. Maria nodded but didn't respond. She trusted her crew, but the Varknith were a dangerous alien race known for their ruthlessness. They had a reputation for conquering anything that stood in their way. Still, Maria couldn't imagine they would target a hospital ship. They had no reason to, but the unease continued to grow. The hairs on the back of Maria's neck stood up as the ship suddenly jolted, a violent shudder running through its hull. The lights flickered, and the entire ship seemed to groan in protest. "What was that?" Maria asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. "I'm checking the systems now," Captain Orin replied, his fingers flying over his console. His face went pale as he read the data. "Captain, we're under attack." Before she could react, another blast rocked the ship. This time, the Hope's Light lurched violently, sending several crew members tumbling to the ground. The emergency lights flickered on, casting an eerie red glow over the hallways. The ship's automated alarms began to blare, signaling danger. Maria's heart pounded in her chest. "Red alert," she shouted, her voice firm and commanding. "All crew to their stations." The crew scrambled to respond, but it was too late. The first blast had damaged their engines, and the second had caused a hull breach in one of the outer chambers. There was no mistaking it now. The Hope's Light was under heavy fire. "We're being targeted by the Varknoth," Orin yelled, his voice rising in panic. "Their ships are locking onto us." Maria took a deep breath and forced herself to stay calm. Panic would do no good now. She turned to the ship's chief scientist, Dr. Caleb Turner, who was standing near the medical bay doors. He was usually a quiet, unassuming man, but there was something about the way he held himself now that suggested he was more than just a scientist. He had an intensity in his eyes that Maria had never seen before. "Caleb, we need to stabilize the ship. Can you help us?" Maria asked. Caleb didn't answer right away. His eyes scanned the damage reports, his mind clearly racing. Then, without a word, he moved towards the ship's control panel. "I'll see what I can do," Caleb said quietly, as if it was just another day at the lab. Maria nodded, trusting him implicitly. Caleb had been with the crew for years. He wasn't just a scientist. He had a vast knowledge of technology, engineering, and systems that most people didn't even begin to understand. He had always been there in the background, quietly contributing, but now, in this moment of crisis, Maria was beginning to realize just how invaluable he truly was. Meanwhile, the ship continued to shudder under the force of the alien weapons. The Varknith ships were closing in, their sleek, black forms looming ominously in the distance. The alien race was known for their terrifying weaponry. Lasers that could cut through steel and plasma bombs that could obliterate entire fleets. Maria knew that if they didn't act fast, they would be destroyed. As the ship rocked again, Maria glanced at the screen. There, on the display, was a visual of the enemy ships. 3 massive Vaknath warships, their cannons aimed directly at the Hope's light. The odds seemed impossible. They were just a hospital ship, with no weapons to defend themselves. The ship shuddered again, and Maria's eyes widened. They were out of time. "Caleb, what's the status?" she asked, her voice strained with urgency. Caleb's fingers flew over the console, his face expressionless. "We're not going to make it unless we do something drastic. The Vaknath are about to destroy us." Maria felt her stomach twist in fear, but Caleb's next words stopped her cold. "But I know a way we can turn this around," Caleb said, his voice calm as ever. "We can't fight them with force, but I've been preparing for something like this. I have a plan." Maria blinked, unsure whether to feel relieved or more anxious. What plan could Caleb possibly have in such a situation? "The Vaknath have made a mistake," Caleb continued, his tone growing more confident. "They think they're attacking a helpless medical ship. But what they don't realize is that I've been studying their technology for years. I've prepared something that will make them regret ever targeting us." Maria's heart raced as she processed his words. "What do you mean? What have you done?" Caleb turned towards her, his eyes gleaming with determination. "I've been working in secret, Maria. I've developed technology that can outsmart the Vaknath and destroy their ships. But I need your trust. If you give me the command, we'll fight back." For the first time since the attack began, Maria allowed herself to hope. She nodded slowly. "Do it, Caleb. Do whatever it takes." As the battle raged outside the ship, Caleb's mind went into overdrive. It was time for the Vaknath to learn just how dangerous humanity could be. The Hope's light continued to tremble as the alien warships bombarded it from all sides. The hull groaned under the force of the blasts, and every second felt like a lifetime. Captain Maria Sullivan stood frozen, her mind racing. The ship's automated systems were failing, and the crew was in panic mode. No one had expected this. They were a hospital ship, meant to help, not fight. The Vaknath were known for their brutal tactics, and it seemed like they were going to wipe out the Hope's light without a second thought. Maria's mind was spinning with questions. Why? Would they attack a medical vessel? What had they hoped to gain from this? But none of that mattered now. The reality was simple: the Hope's light was on the verge of being destroyed, in the middle of the chaos. Caleb Turner remained calm. He moved swiftly, with a focused purpose, as if the gravity of the situation had no hold on him. He was no longer the quiet scientist they all knew. The storm of fear and uncertainty had brought out a different side of him, one that was decisive and deadly. His fingers flew across the control panels, inputting commands with precise efficiency. It was clear he wasn't just an expert in medicine. He was a genius who had been waiting for a moment like this. Maria approached Caleb, her voice steady but full of concern. "Caleb, we don't have much time. What exactly are you planning?" Caleb didn't look up from his work. "We're not going to defeat them with brute force, Maria. But we don't need to. I've been researching the Vaknath for years. Their technology is advanced, but it's not invincible. We can exploit their weaknesses." Maria's brow furrowed. In confusion, their weaknesses. How Caleb turned to her, his eyes filled with an intensity she had never seen before. The Vaknath have a system of communication that relies on a central hub. If we disrupt that hub, their fleet will fall apart. They'll be blind, unable to coordinate or respond effectively. It's their Achilles heel. Maria took a moment to process his words. It made sense, but she couldn't help but wonder how they could possibly pull this off. The ship was damaged, their resources were limited, and the enemy was relentless. Yet Caleb seemed unfazed, as if he had been preparing for this moment his entire life. "What do we need to do?" Maria asked, her voice tinged with a mix of hope and doubt. "We need to get close enough to their flagship to plant a virus. It will disable their communication systems, turning their fleet into a disorganized mess. But getting there won't be easy." Caleb's eyes gleamed with determination. "I've already started rewriting the ship's core systems. We'll use the hospital's advanced medical tech to disguise our movements. They won't see us coming." Maria's heart pounded as she processed his plan. It was risky, almost impossible, but it was their only shot. The Vaknath were far more powerful, and without this move, they would be crushed. "We can do this," Caleb said, his voice calm but filled with an eerie confidence. "I've been preparing for something like this my entire life. I've studied their tactics, their technology, and their weaknesses. The Vaknath made one fatal mistake, underestimating humanity. They'll regret that mistake." Maria nodded, her faith in Caleb growing with each passing second. "Let's do it, Caleb. We'll follow your lead." With a deep breath, Caleb turned to his console, activating the next phase of his plan. "I'm initiating the system override now. Prepare yourselves. It's going to get intense." As Caleb worked, the crew of the Hope's Light scrambled to their stations. The medical team was used to saving lives, not fighting. But they trusted Caleb, and now, more than ever, they knew they had no choice but to fight back. Caleb's fingers moved with lightning speed, typing in a sequence of codes that Maria could barely understand. He was using the hospital's medtech systems to manipulate the ship's primary defenses. The machines, designed to heal and restore, were now going to be their greatest weapon. With each command he input, the ship's systems came to life, as if the Hope's Light was waking up from a long sleep, ready for battle. "Okay," Caleb said, looking up for the first time, his voice steady. "We're ready. Won't know what hit them." Suddenly, the Hope's Light lurched again, a heavy blast shaking the ship. The emergency lights flickered, and alarms blared across the ship. The Vaknath weren't letting up, but Caleb remained unfazed. "Time to execute," he muttered, and with a final press of a button, a strange hum filled the ship. The Hope's Light's core systems were now fully engaged in Caleb's plan. The ship's engines roared to life, as Caleb navigated them toward the Vaknath flagship, which loomed ahead in the vast expanse of space. The Vaknath warships continued to fire, but this time something was different. The Hope's Light was moving faster, more silently than before. It was as if the ship had become a shadow, slipping past the enemy without a trace. Maria stared out of the bridge's window, watching as the alien ships continued their assault. Yet, with each passing second, their movements seemed more erratic. They were no longer in sync. Their attacks were missing. Their coordination was falling apart. "Caleb, what's happening?" Maria asked, her voice filled with awe. Caleb smiled, his eyes never leaving the controls. "It's working. Their communication systems are down. They can't organize their attack anymore. We're in the clear. Maria couldn't believe it. Against all odds, Caleb had done it. The Hope's Light was now a predator in the heart of the Varknith fleet, striking from the shadows. The Varknith had no idea what was coming for them. The next phase was about to begin, and Caleb knew it would be just as brilliant as the first. The Varknith Empire had no idea what they had just unleashed, and soon they would learn the cost of underestimating humanity. The Hope's Light drifted through space like a ghost, its engines now humming with quiet power. The Varknith fleet, unaware of the turn of events, continued to fire upon the helpless human hospital ship. But their shots went wide, their lasers missing by miles. The Hope's Light had become an enigma, a moving target that no longer responded. The way the Varknith expected Maria stood on the bridge, her heart pounding in her chest. The atmosphere in the room had shifted from despair to a quiet, concentrated energy. The crew had pulled together, and now they were part of something greater than themselves. They were no longer a medical vessel, they were warriors, fighting back with a force they never thought possible. Caleb was calm, focused, as always. He had activated a series of countermeasures that allowed the Hope's Light to weave between the blasts with impossible precision. His eyes moved rapidly across the console, his fingers typing out commands with lightning speed. The hospital ship had become a weapon, its systems altered to match Caleb's ingenious plan. Captain, we're getting close to the Varknith flagship, Caleb said, his voice steady, betraying no sign of the intensity in the air. I need you to trust me on this next step. It's a risk, but it's our only chance. Maria swallowed hard. What's the plan? Caleb turned to face her, his gaze unwavering. We're going to take control of their central command. If we can hijack their network, we'll have access to every ship in their fleet. We'll be able to disable their weapons, cripple their navigation, and turn the tide of this war in one move. Maria's heart skipped a beat. The Varknith's flagship was a fortress, protected by layers of high-tech security. To break into that system would be nothing short of a miracle. But Caleb's plan was already in motion, and she had learned long ago to trust his instincts. The crew worked in silence, each person understanding the importance of their role. The sound of rapid typing and soft murmurs of communication filled the bridge. Caleb was orchestrating the attack, and everyone knew they were only moments away from entering enemy territory. We're almost there, Caleb said, his voice low. Once we break through their defenses, I'll need you to give the signal to deploy the virus. Maria nodded, her mind sharp with focus. Understood. Outside the ship, the Varknith fleet seemed to grow closer, their massive warships hovering, like predators ready to strike. Yet the Hope's Light seemed to fade into the stars, moving silently and smoothly as it neared the Varknith flagship. The first few minutes of this stealth maneuver were every crew member on the ship was holding their breath, praying that the Varknith didn't realize they were being attacked from within. The Varknith warships continued to fire at the Hope's Light, but their shots were growing more erratic. They couldn't lock onto their target anymore. The Hope's Light was too fast, too unpredictable. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Caleb looked up, his eyes alight with victory. We're in. Their central hub is now under our control. Maria barely had time to react before Caleb pressed a final button. In that instant, a wave of energy rippled through the ship, and a deep hum filled the air. The Hope's Light had launched its virus-an invisible weapon designed to hijack the Varknith's entire fleet. On the bridge, the crew watched in awe as the data screens flashed with results. The Varknith ships, once perfectly synchronized, now seemed to be malfunctioning. Their movements became erratic, their attacks missing the Hope's light by even wider margins. Maria turned to Caleb, her voice a mix of awe and disbelief. Did it work? Caleb's lips curled into a slight smile. Yes, we've disabled their central command. Their fleet is paralyzed. But Caleb's plan didn't stop there. He wasn't finished yet. We're going to take this one step further, Caleb said, his voice full of resolve. It's time to make them pay for attacking us. He turned back to the console, his fingers moving faster now, his concentration unshakable. The Hope's light shuddered once more as Caleb triggered the next phase of his plan. The ship's medical systems, once designed to heal and restore, now became instruments of war. They were no longer just tools of compassion. They were weapons, honed and crafted to take down the Varknith from the ship's core. Caleb initiated a series of electromagnetic pulses that spread out like waves of destruction. Each pulse struck the Varknov ships with surgical precision, disrupting their power grids and throwing their weapons systems into chaos. The Varknith's once imposing fleet was now a shadow of its former self, their warships grinding to a halt one by one. "Captain, the flagship's shields are down," Caleb said, his voice steady but filled with a quiet triumph. "This is our chance." Without hesitation, Maria gave the order. "All crew, prepare for the final strike." The Hope's light surged forward, its engines roaring to life. The crew, once medical professionals, now worked in perfect unison, following Caleb's lead as they moved in for the final assault on the Varknith flagship. The enemy fleet was still in disarray, their warships unable to defend themselves as the Hope's light approached the heart of their empire. The final battle was upon them. Asterisk, the Varknith flagship loomed ahead, its imposing silhouette casting a shadow over the Hope's light. The once impervious alien warship now seemed vulnerable, its defenses shattered by Caleb's ingenious manipulation of their technology. Yet, the flagship's core remained intact, and with it, the heart of the Varknith Empire. Maria Sullivan stood at the helm, her fingers gripping the armrest of the command chair. She could feel the weight of history pressing down on her. In this moment, she wasn't just leading a crew, she was leading a charge against an entire empire, an empire that had made the grave mistake of underestimating humanity. "Caleb," Maria said, her voice steady but filled with urgency. "We've taken down their fleet, but we still need to neutralize the flagship. What's next?" Caleb stood at the center of the bridge, his gaze unwavering as he scanned the data streams flowing before him. His expression was a mixture of determination and satisfaction. He had done the impossible, turned a hospital ship into a weapon of war, but the battle wasn't over yet. The flagship is still operational. "But its power is unstable," Caleb replied, his eyes gleaming with a quiet intensity. "I've disabled their weapon systems, but the core remains intact. We need to sabotage it from within. The only way to do that is by getting inside and triggering a meltdown." Maria's stomach tightened at the thought. A meltdown inside the Varknith flagship could destroy the entire ship and its crew, but it was their only option. "How do we get inside?" Maria asked, her voice laced with uncertainty. Caleb's lips curled into a confident smile. "Leave that to me. I've already bypassed their security protocols. The ship's internal systems are mine to command." With a series of swift keystrokes, Caleb unlocked the flagship's defenses. The Hope's light surged forward, its engines now roaring with power as they approached the vulnerable flagship. As they neared, the Varknith flagship's massive cannons flared to life, but the shots missed wide. their aim thrown off by Caleb's virus. "Prepare for entry," Caleb said, his voice cold and calculated. "We're going in." The ship's engines roared as they glided effortlessly into the flagship's docking bay. The massive doors of the bay opened, and the Hope's light slid into the heart of the enemy ship. Inside, the space was eerily quiet. The once bustling corridors of the Varknath flagship were now deserted, the crew scrambling to restore control over their failing systems. "Stay alert," Maria said, her voice low. "This is uncharted territory. We don't know what we'll face inside." The crew moved quickly, following Caleb as he led them into the depths of the flagship. The corridors were dark, their lights flickering in a dull, sickly glow. It was like walking through a ghost shipper, once proud symbol of power, now reduced to a hollow shell. Caleb moved with precision, his mind working in overdrive. He knew every inch of the Varknath's systems, every weak point, every blind spot. He had studied their ship's blueprints for years, and now his knowledge was the key to their victory. "We're almost there," Caleb muttered, his voice barely a whisper. "The reactor core is just ahead. Once we reach it, we'll trigger." The meltdown. Maria's heart raced. The reactor core was the heart of the Varknath flagship, the source of its immense power. If they could destroy it, the entire fleet would be rendered useless, and the Varknath would be forced to retreat. But getting to the core wouldn't be easy. The flagship's security systems were still operational, and there was no telling what kind of traps or defenses awaited them. As they moved deeper into the ship, the tension in the air grew thick, each step bringing them closer to their goal land, closer to danger. Suddenly, the silence was shattered by a loud, echoing screech. The metallic doors ahead slid open, revealing a group of Varknath soldiers, their alien forms towering and menacing. They raised their weapons, ready to engage. Maria's heart skipped a beat, but Caleb didn't flinch. He had expected this. Without a word, he reached for a small device on his belt and activated it. A pulse of electromagnetic energy rippled through the air, disabling the soldiers' weapons and sending them crashing to the ground in a heap. Maria's eyes widened in disbelief. Caleb had thought of everything. "Move," Caleb commanded, already. Advancing toward the reactor core. The crew followed him, their feet pounding against the cold, metal floors of the flagship. They couldn't afford to waste any time. The closer they got to the core, the more intense the resistance became. Varknath soldiers appeared from every direction, but Caleb and his team were unstoppable. With every encounter, Caleb used his knowledge of their technology to disable their weapons, sending their attackers sprawling to the ground. It was like a dancer, deadly, precise dance that only Caleb could lead. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, they reached the reactor core. The massive, pulsating energy source glowed ominously in the center of the room, its hum vibrating through the ship. "This is it," Caleb said, his voice low but resolute. "We need to set the trigger. Once I activate it, we'll have only minutes before the ship goes critical." Maria stepped forward, her eyes meeting Caleb's. "Do it. We're with you." With a final swift movement, Caleb inserted a data chip into the core's control panel. The ship trembled as the core began to destabilize, the lights flickering wildly around them. Caleb looked up, his face stoic. "It's done. Now, we get out of here." As the countdown to destruction began, the crew turned and sprinted back toward the Hope's light. The flagship shook violently, its walls groaning under the pressure of the impending meltdown. They had only moments before the Varknath flagship would be obliterated. The crew raced through the dark, twisting corridors. the sound of their footsteps echoing through the now-dead ship. As they neared the docking bay, they could hear the ship's systems failing, its alarms blaring in a final, desperate warning. Just as the countdown reached its final seconds, the Hope's light blasted out of the docking bay, the ship's engines roaring as they made their escape. The Varkneth flagship erupted behind them, a massive explosion lighting up the dark expanse of space. The shockwave rippled across the battlefield, and the Varkneth fleet was thrown into chaos. Maria watched from the bridge of the Hope's light as the explosion consumed the flagship, a massive cloud of debris and fire. The Varkneth Empire had just lost their heart. They had been shattered in an instant. Caleb turned to Maria, his expression unreadable. "This is just the beginning," he said softly. "They'll know the cost of underestimating humanity." And as the Hope's light sailed into the darkness of space, Maria knew one thing for certain: the galaxy would never look at humanity the same way again. Asterisk. The stars outside the Hope's light seemed to shimmer with a cold, distant beauty, but inside the ship, everything had changed. The Varkneth flagship was no more, and the entire enemy fleet was in disarray. Their greatest weapon had been destroyed in a single, calculated strike, and the heart of their empire had been obliterated. The crew of the Hope's light stood in stunned silence, watching as the shockwave from the explosion continued to ripple across the battlefield. Maria Sullivan couldn't believe what they had accomplished. Just hours ago, they were a crew of medical professionals caught in an unthinkable attack. Now, they were heroes, having dealt a crippling blow to an empire that had believed it was invincible. "We did it," Maria whispered, more to herself than anyone else. She felt the weight of their victory, but there was no time to celebrate. The war wasn't over yet. The Varknoth were ruthless, and though their flagship was destroyed, there were still pockets of resistance left within their fleet. They would regroup, and when they did, they would be even more dangerous. "Captain," Caleb's voice cut through her thoughts. He was standing at the navigation panel, his eyes fixed on the screen. "There's something you need to see." Maria joined him, her heart pounding in anticipation. The data feed from the Varkneth fleet was still coming through, and as the numbers flickered across the screen, she saw the Varkneth were beginning to retreat. Their remaining ships were turning tail, heading back toward their homeworld. But there was more. Caleb's expression was unreadable as he continued to scroll through the intel. "It's not just retreat. They're planning something. They're preparing for a final assault." Maria's stomach twisted. The Varkneth were smart. They knew they had been outplayed, but they weren't going down without a fight. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice tinged with concern. "They're reassembling their fleet," Caleb said, his eyes narrowing. "And they're going to hit Earth. They're targeting the homeworld." Maria's mind raced. Earth was humanity's heart, the one place the Varkneth could never afford to lose. If they attacked Earth, it would be the beginning of a war humanity might not survive. "We can't let them get there," Maria said, her voice hardening with resolve. "We need to stop them." Caleb's fingers moved quickly across the console, his face set in determination. "I have a plan. It's risky, but if we do this right, we can destroy their fleet once and for all. It'll take everything we have, but we can win." Maria felt a surge of hope. Caleb had already turned the tide once. If anyone could stop the Varkneth, it was him. "What's the plan?" she asked. Caleb looked up, his eyes cold with the fire of a man determined to finish what had been started. "We're going to take the fight to their homeworld. We're going to destroy their entire fleet, and we're going to make sure they can never threaten Earth again." The crew gathered around, each one of them understanding the gravity of the situation. There would be no second chances. They would have to strike quickly and decisively, or the Varknith would destroy everything humanity had fought for. "We'll use the Hope's light as a decoy," Caleb explained. "We'll lure the Varknith fleet to a remote region of space, far from Earth. There, I'll trigger a series of explosions within their fleet's command network. The chaos will cripple them. We'll take out their communications, their weapons, everything." Maria nodded, her mind working furiously. It was a brilliant plan, but it was also dangerous. The Hope's light would be the bait, and once the Varknith were drawn into the trap, they would have to rely on Caleb's virus to bring them down. There was no room for error. "We'll need to move fast," Maria said. "Once we disable their fleet, we'll need to destroy their homeworlds. Defenses, it's the only way to ensure they don't retaliate." Caleb nodded, already inputting the necessary commands. "I've already set up the coordinates. We'll move in under the cover of darkness. The Varknith won't know what hit them." As the crew prepared for the final assault, Maria stood at the bridge, staring out at the stars. For the first time since this journey began, she felt a sense of finality. This was it. They were taking the fight to the Varknith homeworld, and they would either win or die trying.